Important session on Russia's hybrid warfare in the context of the 2024 election year in the European Union Parliament, and the United States. My name is Simeon Tsomokos. I represent the Delphi Economic Forum in Greece. I am delighted and honored to chair such a distinguished panel of speakers, which I will introduce you immediately. Mr. Greg Miller, I will follow the order of the organizers. Foreign investigating correspondent in the Washington Post in the United States. Greg, thank you. Ms. Salina Bargawanu, the Senior Associate Expert Professor, actually, am I right, of the New Strategy Center, Dean of the Faculty of Communications and Public Relations in Romania. And of course, we have Didier Lauras, a journalist from France, the press agency France. And we have Mr. Attila Sonfalvi, yes, who is a researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies at the University of Tel Aviv. So welcome all. We know the rules of the game. I mean, each one will say a few words, 7-8 minutes of your introductory remarks, and then perhaps we can open the discussion. But let me say a few introductory remarks. Of course, everybody knows that this is the year of the multiple crucial elections in both sides of the Atlantic. Actually, we have also the announcement of the elections in Great Britain on the 4th of July now. Snap elections. So more voters than ever in history will head to the polls, as at least 64 countries plus the European Union, representing a combined population of approximately 49% of the people in the world. Actually, in India, I think there is a long process. Still, the election goes on, if I'm right. And of course, the two major elections, the US presidential election in November and the European elections in June, can have major geopolitical implications for the world, and the two main theaters of confrontation between the West and Russia and Ukraine and the Middle East. We have already seen evidence of the hybrid war by Russia in many elections and countries in Europe, not just today, but since at least 2016 at Brexit, at the French presidential election in 2017, the US presidential election in 2016 as well. But in this sense, the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the ensuing war has acted as a catalyst for this type of hybrid warfare. Over the past 2-3 years, Brussels has been shaken by spying scandals affecting the European institutions, and we now see evidence of Russian interference in individual countries like Slovakia and even nearby Moldova, which also have elections this year. So it is no wonder that Russia is targeting the crown jewel of the West, the way our democracies operate and progress. The fundamental principle of a peaceful transition of power and popular vote is antithetical to the Russian paradigm of autocratic rule, and the Kremlin has identified democracy as the West's weak point. We have today with us an excellent panel, and I thank them very much. So I would like to start actually with Greg Miller from the United States. Actually, he's based in London. He's a multiple award journalist and have written an exceptional book on Russia's interference in 2016. The presidential election, and he's going to speak about that, and also he may tell us a little more about if there are any differences from then to today. So Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simeon. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and it's great to meet all of my distinguished panelists and to be here in Bucharest, actually, for the first time. So as Simeon said, I'm an investigative correspondent for the Washington Post. I'm based in London and have been based in London for about 3 years. Before that, I spent about 20 years in Washington, D.C. as a national security reporter, covering the CIA, covering the post-September 11 counterterrorism operations and wars for the United States. But my career took a big turn in 2015 and 2016, and I thought we could talk about that a tiny bit. I was really at the center of the Post's coverage of Russian interference in the 2016 election in the United States. and our coverage for that for those stories won the 2018 Pulitzer Prize. As Simeon said, there's really no doubt that Russia will again seek to influence the 2024 election in the United States. In fact, it's already doing so. But I guess I would say that 2024 is not 2016. And I think, and I expect the impact of Russian interference to be substantially diminished in the United States this time around. Now, this isn't entirely good news, because the reasons for this are that some things have gotten better, but at the same time, other things, including the level of polarization and the sort of nature of the electorate in the United States has changed profoundly since then. So maybe we can spend a few minutes chatting about this. The top intelligence official in the United States recently testified that Russia remains the most active foreign threat to our elections, that the Kremlin's goals include eroding trust in U.S. democratic institutions, exacerbating socio-political divisions in the United States, and degrading Western support to Ukraine. AI and deepfakes will and already have been deployed. Whenever there's a case of Russian interference, there's always an entity behind it, and there's a new one that's been surfacing in the coverage in the United States press. It's called Storm 156. It's an entity that appears to be kind of a collection of elements from what used to be the troll farm in St. Petersburg that Prigozhin operated before his demise earlier this year. The Storm 156 has been behind a couple of interesting social media operations recently that have been identified by U.S. officials. One of them was a video that got some traction online purporting to show a troll farm in Ukraine allegedly run by the CIA and tasked with ensuring Trump's defeat. So this was a remarkable bit of kind of cyber gaslighting, Russia accusing the United States of doing from Ukraine what Russia, in fact, has been doing since 2015 or 2016. Another video showed Ukrainian soldiers burning an effigy of Trump, meant to demonstrate Ukrainian frustration with Trump's interference in the flow of weapons and American support to Ukraine. You know, this actually got a fair amount of traction online and was cited by far-right media entities in the United States, including InfoWars, even though these alleged Ukrainian soldiers spoke with Russian accents, and that it was pretty clear to anybody who took a close look that this was not an authentic video. The impact is discernible. We've had, remarkably, Republican officials in the United States, including the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, recently saying that Russian propaganda has made its way into the United States and it has infected a good chunk of my party's base. The chair of the House Intelligence Committee complained that anti-Ukraine messages from Russia, quote, are being uttered on the House floor. So it's reaching its target, right, and landing. Still, I think that there are substantial differences between 2016 and 2024 that will be important. The American political environment is very different. Social media platforms have gotten better at detecting and blocking foreign campaigns. U.S. government institutions are more aggressive about calling attention to, exposing, or disrupting foreign disinformation operations, including those two examples I just mentioned. The CIA literally publicly announced that this video had been produced by Russian entities, the one I mentioned just a minute ago. It's also important to note that Russia has different objectives now than it did in 2016. Ukraine is an overriding and overwhelming priority for Russia. These two examples I cited both had substantial Ukraine elements to the messaging. And all of the experts that I've talked to in the United States say that much of the disinformation content they see coming from Russian entities may start with a seemingly American political message, but quickly pivot to Ukraine, quickly pivot into an effort to undermine Western support for Ukraine. Finally, I would say that the electorate has changed a lot since 2016. Voters, I think, are generally more sophisticated about disinformation in the US, or at least they understand at some level that much of the content they encounter online is manipulated. And I don't think that was true in 2015 or 2016. As a result, they're more skeptical of the content they encounter. They sort of expect that some of it is going to be false. They are also, American voters are far more polarized than they appeared to be in 2016. The parties are more extreme. It's harder to move the needle. Russia can pump as much disinformation as it wants into social media, but it's harder to move a voter from one camp to another in the United States. There were aspects also in the 2016 Russian disinformation campaign that I think sometimes we forget. We tend to focus on the bots. We tend to focus on the extensive level of operations and disinformation penetrating social media platforms, especially Facebook at the time. But there was really a second element of the 2016 effort by Russia that we don't see so far this time, and that was the hack and dump operation in which the GRU and SVR both penetrated the computers of the Democratic National Committee, pilfered many thousands of internal communications and emails and documents, delivered those to WikiLeaks, and basically sat back and watched while news organizations, including my own, set up special teams to comb through all that material and write hundreds of stories, with hundreds of headlines, all focused on Hillary Clinton, the Democratic Party, and emails, all centering on a pre-existing scandal at the time. I'm going to wrap up by saying that I think that I'll just end by describing anecdotally what I've sort of noticed then and now. In 2016, as the election approached, I remember hearing frequently from friends who were seeing outrageous claims, outrageous allegations planted online, and wanting to know whether this was true. Maybe one of the best known was the unfounded allegation that Hillary Clinton and a pizza restaurant in Northwest Washington were all part of a sinister child abuse conspiracy. And remarkably, this got a remarkable traction in US audiences. And I literally would hear from friends asking, is there anything to this? I don't get those. I'm not getting questions like that at all anymore. I don't get queries from friends about material they encounter online like that, asking, is it right or is it wrong? And what I get now is different and in some ways perhaps even more dispiriting. We had I live in London now, as I said, and we had a relative visiting us recently, and as much as I try to avoid talking about American politics over dinner, we turned to that subject briefly. And this person who was sitting at our table said, with sincerity, look, I've given up on reading the news. I just don't know what is trustworthy anymore. And part of me wanted to, either strangle this person or at least take the plate away from this person who's eating a dinner paid for by the Washington Post. But I also felt some sympathy for this person, and I felt like I guess I understand that. There is so much information, so many outlets, so many sources of information, that I think we're all living through an experiment in democracy that none of us really knows how it will end. There's more information, and more facts to be found, but there's also more conspiracism, more polarization, more populism, and more distrust. And so this person who said this, I think, was voicing the frustration and, in fact, almost the sense of feeling defeated for many people who encounter this avalanche of material. I don't want to identify this person, but let's just say that I don't think this person was saying this to me only because she wished that her daughter hadn't married a journalist. Okay.
Greg, thank you very much. I think you gave us some insights of what is happening in the United States. One thing that has changed also is technology, am I right, from 2016 to 2024. I think this is an important issue as well, which we may discuss a little later. So I'll go to Alina, who actually is going to speak about the pan-European responses to disinformation and election interference. You are going to present a case study, actually, am I right?
Yes.
So we're all ears and eyes on this.
Yes.
Thank you, Alina.
Thank you very much. And I will kindly ask the support team to display my slides. You are right. I'll talk about pan-European responses to disinformation and electoral interference. And the case study that I will present is very close to me because, as you could see, I am part of the European Digital Media Observatory Advisory Council, and I will talk more about what EDMO is doing in the European Union. And also I was part of EDMO 2 task forces. One of the task forces was about the war in Ukraine, and we published a report immediately after the invasion. I think it was April 2022. And also now I'm part of the EDMO task force on 2024 European elections, so I know these examples rather, so it is not from books, but I am very close to their design. Hopefully, I talk a lot about technology, but I'm very technologically lagging. Does this go to the next slide? Yes, this is what I'm trying to do. Okay. So you saw this slide yesterday, I put it today in order to underline the fact that election interference is one of the many possible actions in the hybrid political information warfare. And this is my introductory remark, and this will also be my concluding remark that hybrid warfare, political warfare, information warfare won't stop after the elections are gone, since election interference is one of the many possible actions. So this is why I put the slide that you also saw yesterday. Going a little bit, not in great detail about what works in dealing with disinformation, election interference, hybrid warfare. I think, as I said yesterday, debunking, pre-bunking, and radical exposure of raw intelligence definitely work. I think there is a misconception that fact-checking doesn't work, that pre-bunking doesn't work. I think this is partly a strategy to discredit disinformation effort, to rebrand fighting disinformation, tackling disinformation as censorship, for example, which is a remarkable achievement for propaganda in the first place. What other things that work? I think that I deeply believe in interinstitutional and transdisciplinary approaches. I think that in order to fight, to understand propaganda, disinformation, we have to have socio-technical expertise. I think that this is what is greatly lacking. We have the social sciences guys in one silo, we have the technical guys in another silo, and I think that in order to understand the phenomena in the first place, we need socio-technical expertise. Another thing that works, and this fits into what Greg presented and what you made reference to, I think that evidence-based exposure of disinformation definitely has an impact. When talking about Russian interference, Russian propaganda, we have to be very specific. You have to come up with hard truths, with technological evidence, to do sourcing, to do attribution, to prove funding. Otherwise, there is the risk to create what the literature calls perception hack. I mean, either to create the feeling that the Russians are all powerful, or to create some sort of a fear, okay, they are so powerful, so there is nothing we can do about it. So again, when talking about these things, you have to be very, very precise to come up with evidence, to come up with attribution, and to come up with technical attribution, and then with political attribution. And here I concur with Greg in saying that compared to 2016, I think that both the intelligence community, the academic community have made great progress in doing attribution. With a very short parenthesis, my concern is that at some point attribution no longer functions, is no longer persuasive. So this is, for example, what keeps me up at night. Leaving these lessons learned for those who want to learn, I will go to the next slide. I think that I have put here, for those who are interested, I think that this could be interested also for our American counterparts, a pretty comprehensive list, as I see it, of pan-European responses to disinformation. So it is about policy, attempted policies, institutional responses, systemic responses. So these are not informal alliances, let's do some literacy, but it is about some systemic responses to disinformation. And the list is quite long. I mean, I was also pleasantly somehow surprised to see that the possibilities to fight disinformation in an institutional, in a policy-driven way are there. So we have the EU versus disinformation, which does a lot of work in doing attribution, technical attribution and political attribution too. We have the European Digital Media Observatory, I will come to it. There was a resolution in the Parliament in 2 terms of the European Parliament, so it survived the mandate of one Parliament, meaning that we can talk about policy and not about politics. We have the strengthened code of practice on disinformation, to which major digital companies signed up to. So there was the first edition of the Code of Practice on Disinformation in 2018 and the reinforced code in 2022. We have the Digital Services Act, which is in full compliance starting with February 2024, which is a major piece of legislation trying to rein in the power of platforms, including in regulating, so coming up with hard regulation about hate speech, about foreign disinformation, inauthentic coordinated behavior on platforms, so again, harsh measures. We also have some measures, some regulation for the audiovisual environment, not to forget that it is not only platforms, but also mainstream media. So we have the revised Audiovisual Media Service Directive. We have an interesting piece of legislation which is called SLAP, which is not very popular, not very known at the time, which is called Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. It is a major piece of legislation in the European Union trying to prevent bogus trials against journalists and civic activists, because many of the people who try to fight foreign disinformation, Russian propaganda and stuff like that, have been exposed to lengthy and very, very costly lawsuits. And this is a specific type of legislation which helps preventing this type of action. And also there are 2 types of policy pieces that are not in effect but are already approved, which is the AI Act, which also has some provisions for using AI for targeting, for political targeting and micro-messaging. And also we have specific regulation on transparency of political ads during electoral campaigns. These are not instruments that can be used for this particular elections on the 9th of June. But again, we are talking about policy, and hopefully policy can survive politics. And again, I think that this is a good inventory. The idea is that we have to know these types of policy interventions. We have to have the capabilities, including the technological capabilities, to put them into practice. We have to have the right bureaucrats to implement them. So there is a lot of things in doing implementation. Now, if you allow me, I will talk about XIIb.EU as a case study in cross-disciplinary and cross-borders interventions. And again, I know this case very closely. Of course, I think it is the best case. No, I'm kidding. Of course, I'm attached to it because I have been part of it. Let me tell you some of the big conversations that we have before establishing the task force on European elections. So really there were 3 or 4 meetings clarifying what is the scope of work to make sure that we do not interfere with legitimate political conversation, where to draw the lines between what we could call Russian interference or foreign interference and legitimate political conversation. And really that was a very, very hard conversation, and I was very happy to be part of it. And I think, again, when talking about foreign interference in the context of elections, we have to be very sure that we do not use the pretext of very real foreign interference to stifle legitimate political conversation. Some extra challenges for establishing XIIb.EU, Task Force for European Elections, were the scars left by the pandemic, and that in our understanding there is a crystallization of different toxic narratives into one articulate worldview. So it is not a meta-narrative, but it is directly a worldview. We do not trust you. We do not trust the elites. We do not trust journalists. We do not trust politicians. We do not trust doctors, scientists, and stuff like this. So I think that this definitely is a very important trigger for foreign interference. And also another scar, the ongoing war against Ukraine. So again, we had multiple discussions clarifying this kind of issues, and again, not to make sure that we do not provide arguments to the idea that we are a censorship mechanisms and stuff like this. And here are some of the XIIb.EU activities. There is a disinfo bulletin which publishes pieces of content daily. So a lot of information. Weekly insights and early warnings. I will show you some examples. Public reporting, monthly fact-checking, briefs and synthesis, larger investigations or SINT investigations, follow the money investigations, and also media literacy campaign specifically for the EU elections, which is called Be Election Smart. And here I will show you some examples of the thing, in order to prove that the pandemic is still a topic in the European conversations. I think that we forgot too easily the lessons of the pandemic in terms of disinformation, infodemics, information disorder, how people fell to all what we call crazy conspiracies, but just labeling them crazy doesn't help with the issue. And here you see some continuity about the anti-vaccination messages and feeding into the topic of European elections. And this is based on the work of fact-checkers across the European Union. So there is not an organism in Brussels or in Florence deciding this, but it simply collects the fact-checking work of XIIb fact-checking network. Here is another example about the fact that the Ukraine topic feeds a lot of conversation from this point of view. And again, these types of articles, I mean, there are two types of mechanism to prove that these are instances of foreign interference. First of all, they are coordinated, they show up in different countries. This is why I highlighted. We've read that this kind of content can be detected in different countries, so it is transnational, and also relying on the trust in the local fact checkers that they have done the thorough investigation in advance. And another example here about early warning. For example, you see here that there was an early warning that AstraZeneca vaccine, you know that AstraZeneca company withdrew its vaccine because it was no longer needed. And of course, you could have expected that there will be a lot of disinformation that AstraZeneca withdrew the vaccine because there are instant deaths and stuff like this. So it was an early warning, but these are the likely issue to attract disinformation. So you can do a lot of pre-banking, you can do a lot of early warning. The idea was to do with this kind of content, I mean, how to distribute it more heavily, how to get it to the mainstream and stuff like this. And you see on the right side of the screen, that these are connected to the idea that for example, the vaccine was withdrawn because it was unilaterally banned, because it is dangerous, it is deadly, or connecting to the elections, because just like we had a vaccination certificate, this kind of certificate will be used in order to prevent voters to vote. So in order to go to the voting pool, we'll have to present a similar certificate. So this is why in order to prove the point that both Ukraine and vaccination and the pandemic still plays a role in public conversation. Of course, not in a uniform way across the European Union, maybe in some countries more powerful, in more countries probably this is a solved issue. Again, I wanted to show you this early warning mechanism. So the content is there, the warning is there, the question, what we do in our national public spaces in order to amplify this content, to inoculate our citizens against this. But again, the knowledge is there, the awareness is there, the content is there. The question is what to do in order to make sure that these types of narratives do not hack the public conversations and do not hack people's minds. And here is an example of the campaign, Be Election Smart. And again, this is not political. It doesn't advertise for a political party, of course, but it provides some very intuitive, in the end, media literacy tips. For example, don't fall for the headline, even if it may come from the Washington Post. So in order to be very specific, what still can be done until the 9th of June? So again, I didn't make any kind of reference to the US elections. I think that what can still be done in an electoral context and until the 9th of June, for example, is to protect the election infrastructure from cyber attacks, even low intensity ones. In Romania we have, and sorry for coming with such local examples, but we have VDAO, but they only defaced a website, so that was not a hybrid whatever, so they didn't disable critical infrastructure. But at some point, the objective of cyber attacks, of low intensity cyber attacks, is to create suspicion, to disrupt, so we don't have to wait for the big hit in order to be on the alert. So protecting the election infrastructure from cyber attacks is still a thing that can be done until the 9th of June. Tackling disinformation during the electoral campaign, again, making sure that you do not interfere in legitimate political conversation and competition. What are the things that can be done? Tackling disinformation during the week preceding the day of the elections. I mean, to disenfranchise voters, that to present false information about the location of the booths, for example. This could be instances of interfering with the, so not messaging as such, not trying to influence a political candidate per se, but trying to disrupt the whole electoral process. And also, I think this is important also to our American friends, if you allow me. I think it is very important to tackle disinformation related to the announcement of results in order to avoid post-election uncertainty and chaos. I think it is very, very important for the electoral bodies in nation states to protect the results of the elections, to prevent uncertainty or suspicion that the results have been rigged, for example. Lessons are learned, it's all about implementation. We can have thousands of conferences, expose all the literature or the booming literature or the plans or the legislation. If we do not implement them, I think that we are back to square one. And hopefully policy will survive politics. And I think that after the EU elections at least, we will move from panic about foreign interference to policy design and to policy implementation.
Alina, thank you very much for this very thorough presentation. I understand the observatory is based in Brussels.
It is based in Florence, part of the European University Institute. It was funded by European money. Fantastic. And it has a very good, I mean, with eligibility criteria and evaluation criteria for local fact checkers to apply. These are collected, these are verified by the people in EDMO, these are translated in English, and of course the question is how much traction this type of content has in nation spaces. Yes. So again, with a lesson learned, I think that we should we should focus on distributing this kind of content and not necessarily to produce more content, but to amplify content, because this is what our adversaries are doing. They care a lot about distribution, amplification, and not so much about
Perhaps
content.
later you tell us some cases in your country, Romania. But later, let's
It will
move the
become
discussion.
midnight.
Let's move the discussion to Didier Laura, who is going to speak, how France has been subjected in the terms of Russian hybrid warfare in the recent months. And Didier, do I remember well, there was a case in the TV5 in 2015, which was a very important one. I mean, originally they gave the blame to another organization which had nothing to do with the real, people. So please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I think what I'm going to say is completing what has been said already. In January, in AFP, we received an email from our information director. And in that email, he said, we now live in a post-truth era. And I think it's very important, and I guess my colleague would agree on that, and actually discuss the matter with this lecturer. Reality is actually vanishing. It is disappearing behind narrative, controversies, and radical opinions. So obviously it's making it much more powerful with social networks. The question now is not, I think, therefore I am, but I believe, therefore I'm right. And this is really something that we journalists need to take into account. And I want to say, 15 years ago, AFP was not considering fake news because it's fake and because we are working on real news. And we've been swallowed, we've been called in by a new purpose, a new role in journalism, which is to debunk fake news. I think we need to look at what does Russia want to achieve in France. And I'm going to talk a little bit about 2017 and about recent months. I think what Russia wants to do is to create chaos, basically. Simply, bottom line is, create chaos in the public debate, make democracy inaudible, make European states weak, and make Europe weak. So quick look, in the presidential election 2017, Marine Le Pen, the candidate from the far right, is accused of getting loans from Russian banks. François Fillon, the candidate from the Conservative Party, is accused of making money in his own consulting company with Russian clients. Then Macron campaign team says they face 4,000 attacks, cyber attacks, within one single month. And it became clearly admitted that Russia wanted the victory of either Le Pen or Fillon because both of them were defending a strong France at the expense of a strong Europe. Is it true? I don't think it matters. At the end of the day, Russia invited itself in the political debate. So 7 years later, what do we see? Obviously, as it was mentioned before, Ukraine war is a huge objective for Moscow and a huge tool to create chaos. Is Russia really threatening the EU after Ukraine? Are they going to attack EU? Should we spend more money helping Ukraine? How to deal with inflation directly inherited from the war? All of this is fueling the debate. And of course, should we send soldiers on the ground. As you know, Macron mentioned for the first time in February the possibility, I mean, his refusal to exclude the possibility to send soldiers on the ground. Ever since, we've faced major disinformation campaign. One of them saying, French army recruits anyone who wants to go to Ukraine. Please click on this, blah, 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 with using the logo of the Ministry of Defense and offering huge bonuses. And I'm telling you, no French soldiers ever won so much money, ever. French army has already deployed soldiers using videos of French soldiers somewhere else in Europe, sometimes exercising in Poland or somewhere else, or in Baltic countries or wherever. And usually the content are used on ex-Twitter, Instagram of course, sometimes used by kind of what we would think were mainstream Asian media or African media, and then boosted by Russian troll farms. Second focus, that was not anticipated, of course, the war in Gaza. As you know, France has the biggest Jewish and the biggest Muslim community in Europe. The key issue for France is to avoid importing the conflict from between Israel and Gaza into France. What do we see? Anti-Semitic messages, stars of David painted in the wall of French streets, and more recently, this is still under investigation, but the focus is already on Russia, some red hands painted in the wall of the Memorial of Holocaust. Obviously, the focus is just not clearly anti-Semitic, is to force France to have a debate of the rule of Jews and the conflict between Israel and Gaza. Third focus, the Olympic Games. You would think there's nothing to do with the elections. But basically, the whole purpose, again, is to push the idea that France is weak, that France is unable to organize the games, that France is just unable, full stop. And that's coming just before the election. And again, you're pushing every party to develop a narrative. Are we doing enough on security before the games? Are we good enough on this one? What should we do here? What should we do there? Should we actually send troops? Should we actually help Ukraine? Etc., etc. The whole point of these examples is to remind you disinformation is extremely opportunistic. It would be very inefficient, too visible for Russian outlets and Russian organizations just to push the narrative. Putin is great, the war is wrong, Ukraine should lose, blah, 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 and all the fault is on NATO. That wouldn't work, of course, no way. What is done is to exploit a crack in the society, a debate, a problem, and simply make it bigger, make it crazy, make it hysterical through the social media, through some experts, through some radical opinion. And I'm going to sum up, and I hope it's going to be counted on my credit that I respected my time frame. The challenge we have to face, obviously, and that's been addressed, is how to answer these malign activities. And it's all the more difficult when you refuse to play the game of your enemy, when you refuse yourself to spread fake news, when you're attached to freedom of information, freedom of speech, when you refuse distortion of reality and slander and all this sort of thing. So how can we fight when we don't have the same weapons of the enemy? I think this is probably one of the greatest challenge of democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Didier. Actually, we don't have a timer here. Perhaps we're going to stay here until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so plenty of time to make any presentations. Actually, you made an excellent introduction to Attila, speaking about Israel. And I have to tell you, Attila, that we totally sympathize what has happened on October 7th. And I hope that this war will have a good end by the end of the day for everybody. Please go ahead.
A good end to a war. That's well. I'm gonna say that I wish I could talk about elections in Israel, because it would sign that we are in a normal situation, but we are not. Coming from Tel Aviv after 7 months of war, I would like to emphasize the fact that Israel is bombarded by disinformation and the influence operations made by Iran, made by Russia, made by Hamas, made by Hezbollah, and also made by Islamic organization. One of this organization named ISNAD was revealed just a few weeks ago in Israel. So many players are trying to influence Israelis and the state of mind of the Israelis. Vis-a-vis the Russians, I would say that we are part of the doppelganger operation that was revealed just a few months ago by European and mostly German foreign ministry. The doppelganger operation says it's actually not that smart and complex. It's pretty simple. But the Russians are trying to attack the French, the Germans, the Ukrainians, and the Israelis. And after the 7th of October, we saw the Russians applying their system or their way of working in Israel by trying to widen the cracks that you've been talking about in the society, in Israeli society. And I may say that Israeli society is very divided. The polarization is huge. Right and left, Democrats and conservatives. We had a bad year before 7th of October because of the judicial system that was that the government tried to change and to weaken during a whole year. So the Russians were there all the time. They saw the cracks, they entered, and they are trying even now to widen the polarization in Israeli society. They also acknowledge the fact that a war in the Middle East is very good for them vis-a-vis the world, because they try to emphasize the fact that the war in Gaza and in the Middle East is much more important to be taken in consideration than the war in Ukraine. And by diverting the observation capabilities of the world to what is happening in Gaza and not in Kiev, for example, it's a good opportunity for them. So they did it at the beginning. And they are trying also to make a rift, if I may say, between Jerusalem and Washington vis-a-vis what's happening in the region. For example, just a few months ago, we saw messages being spread around on X mostly, but it's cross-platforms. I may say they are working on Facebook and X, formerly Twitter, and they are trying to spread by the thousands messages saying that when the Americans, for example, are attacking the Houthis, they are weakening Israel. Weird message, but they are trying to infiltrate. They are working very strongly on Telegram. There are 2 channels with hundreds of thousands of Israeli followers on Israeli Telegram, spreading fake news and malinformation, mostly misinformation, malinformation, not directly disinformation as we define disinformation, but they are there. And they are connecting the links between those informations that are being spread around. So they understand how Israeli society works. It's very hard. I'm not sure about the influence. That's one question mark which we have to put upon those influence operations. How effective are they in 2024? We saw them very effective in 2016, so we think. But we don't know because it's out in the open. Everybody is talking about it. And we also see that most of the bots that are working in Hebrew are analphabet in some ways, or illiterate. Their Hebrew is very bad, so you can see that they are not natural Israelis spreading some fake news. It's something of a perhaps AI kind of machine or something else, but it's not pure Israeli messaging. So we can see them. They're out there, they are working there by the thousands, 2,000, 3,000 bots at a time, spreading 2 to 4 links a day with false information from false sites. They are copying sites, news sites, well known in Israel, with something, the name is almost the same, or the graphics looks the same, and they spread it out. Again, with typos and so on. So, when you are aware of the fact that there are powers trying to interfere in your internal affairs, you know how to follow them, and the operations of debunking those misinformation, disinformation operations is crucial. Because as much, the more we talk about, the more we highlight the fact that the Russians are involved, the citizens are much more aware. It doesn't mean that they won't spread it on Telegram or WhatsApp, which is, by the way, from my point of view and our point of view at the INSS in Tel Aviv, we think that WhatsApp is much more dangerous than X, Facebook, and Instagram together are. Because those platforms that are public, everybody sees them. And you can finger point at some disinformation actions. On WhatsApp, we are alone. Nobody knows what you get, and nobody knows what you pass to other people, what you forward. Even with this little sign that they put up there, like saying it was passed or forwarded many times, nobody cares. Really, not really. Nobody really cares. Nobody double checks the information. And I forgot to mention the Chinese also, by the way, that are very, very sophisticated. I just interviewed 2 weeks ago on our podcast at the INSS named Fakeland, the former Minister of Digital Affairs in Taiwan. She's the first one. She was there for 8 years, I think. And she just finished a few weeks ago her tenure there. And she told us, and I think we should look at Taiwan as a good example of how they tackle the problem vis-a-vis the Chinese government, which is very, tough and no scruples there. So they attack the Taiwanese all the time with disinformation operations. But the Taiwanese said, yes, we are working on it. They have a law or a rule that when there is a disinformation spread out there, they debunk it in 2 hours. They have to respond in 2 hours in order to make the public know the truth. So making truth great again is something that democracies, liberal democracies, must tackle together. At this point, when so many malign powers are trying to destroy, and the word is destroy, the Western liberal democracies, and they are working with millions, maybe hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars invested in spreading lies and mostly undermining our trust as civilians and citizens in all the democratic establishments. Alone, we can't do it alone. French can do it alone. The Americans can do it alone. The Israelis can. The Romanians, nobody. The Greek, nobody can do it alone because it's cross-platform and cross-country. So going back to Israel, between 2019 and 2022, we had 5 elections in 4 years. Round after round after round, Netanyahu wasn't able to form a government, right? And even when he didn't form a government and his opponents formed a government, they it was dismantled after 1 year. So we had another round. So 5 rounds of elections in 4 years. And we were following very closely to understand whether the Russians are playing the game in Israel. And I had to tell you that regarding the political system, we didn't see them there. They weren't able to influence. When were the Russians very influential in Israel? During the COVID. And I'll tell you a very short story. I was back then a journalist, and I used to interview every day a doctor or somebody from a hospital, vis-a-vis the COVID things. And Israel was the first with the vaccines, right? So at some point, Israelis ran to get the vaccine. It get up a phone and it stopped. So I was asking the doctors what happened, who is not coming to get the vaccine? And I was very stigmatic, so I said, it's probably the ultra-Orthodox, the Jews. So they said, no, the rabbis let them come, so they are coming, it's okay. So I was again very stigmatic. So I said, oh well, it's not the religious guys, it's the Arabs. They said, no, the Arabs are also coming. So I said, who is not coming? They said, the Russians. The Russians are not coming. I said, what Russians? They said, those immigrants from the 90s, in 1990, 1 million Jews from Russia, former Soviet Union, came to Israel, 1 million, speaking Russian, having the Russian culture, watching Russian news. Oh, okay. Watching the Russian news on TV 24/7 when people are closed in their houses, not allowed to go out because there is COVID, right? People in the 60s and 70s, what do we know from MIT? We know from MIT that above 60 people tend to spread false information much easier. So the doctors in Israel, in the Israeli system, figured out that those people who came in the 90s and they are in the 60s and 70s, during the COVID, were watching Vladimir's TV live all day, and they got the information that using Moderna and Pfizer was killing your family. So these people were not going to get the vaccine by the hundreds of thousands. They were convincing their kids and their grandkids not to go. So they slowed down the entire vaccinating operations. And by the way, friends, you had the same problem in Europe. I remember EU versus disinfo, right? There was a huge Russian operation in Europe to make people stay home and not get the vaccines. I remember even the European officials appearing and blaming the Russians directly. So there we saw the Russian disinformation operation very effective. I believe that if we want to tackle the Russian problem, the Chinese problem, the Iranian problem, and many other players that are coming into this, and we didn't talk about the AI, right? That is changing the fact that every kid at home with a laptop or two can do whatever it wants. But alone, and this is why I am so respectful of what you are doing in Europe here, because the Europeans are at the forefront. And the Americans are waking up. Israelis did do nothing to regulate free speech. When I say free speech, I'm very careful because Israelis wouldn't like to see the government interfere in the democratic free speech. But somebody has to tackle the problem. Now, who is going to be? The Shin Bet? The Secret Service? We don't want the Secret Service to deal with it, right? We don't want Securitate here, or the Stasi. Not that. So who is going to tackle the problem? And the problem has to be tackled on a global way. This is the only thing that works. And there are countries that are doing it very well, like the Taiwanese. They are trying to make truth cool again. And they teach their youngsters to investigate the information they get and to rely to truth as something that is very poisoning for their very existence. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Attila. We have a few more minutes, and of course, I'm sure that the production is a little generous to give us a little more time. Are there any questions from the floor, please? If there are no questions, perhaps I will ask please, lady.
Hello, my name is Anca Grădinaru. I'm from Free Europe, Romania. I would ask you, please, Ms. Mărgăoanu, to describe a little bit situation in Romania before European and elections. 2 days ago, the president of Electoral Authority in Romania said that there are no signs of possibility of external interference in our election in June. And there are no signs of trying to finance from external the Romanian campaign. Do you have another signs, another information? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. I think that if we are to talk about foreign interference in Romanian public conversations, this has already happened long before the election time. So of course now I think that there is almost no need to hack the electoral system, to hack the electoral machines, because again the public conversation, in my understanding, is already hacked. We are talking about the fact that let's kick foreigners out of our country. We want to be the master of our own country. We want to vote Romanian, which is a very poor translation of vote American, which is a completely different story. It is one thing to say in Romania, vote Romanian, and it's a completely different story to say it. And I can elaborate on the reasons. So I think that the major terms of the public conversations have already been hacked. Sorry for the term, but I use it in a very conscious way. It is exactly like hacking hard infrastructure. And talking about this early warning in the first report of the ETMO Task Force on EU elections, the first early warning that one of the main messages which are spreading across the European is that the elections will be rigged, that Brussels will select the candidates, that Washington will put the candidates, that the American embassy in Brussels will decide the results of the elections. And guess what? That was a very harsh campaign by local actors, of course, before Christmas, during Christmas, and afterwards. And this is one of the main narratives in Romania, that the results of the elections are already known and are decided by the big shots in Brussels, in Washington, and stuff like that. So I think that in Romania there is no need for major cyber attacks, for example, but again I fear even low intensity cyber attacks in a small village to make a huge scandal that you see the results have not been counted as such. So this is why I put on the slides that from now until the 9th of June, I think that the institutions who are in charge with this should be in charge with protecting the results of the elections, to protect the announcements, and again to avoid stuff like stop the steal, the elections have been rigged, to have some protest and I don't know what kind of social media hyperactivism.
Lila, we have the same cases in Greece, believe me. Didier, you have to say something, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to that because it's very simple, just the way it's said. When you say there's no sign of external involvement in the election, there's one popular saying about cyber attacks in general. You've got two categories of companies: those who have already been attacked and those who don't know about it. I have absolutely no doubt that there are some endeavors to some kind of external involvement in Romanian elections as in any others. As it was said before, you don't know if it's efficient, and if you see one of them, you cannot say there's one of them. You can say, we've identified one of them. Have we seen 1%, 10%, 99% of the iceberg? Nobody knows. But we have to be extremely humble with cyber attacks and disinformation. You never know, and external involvement, you never know the full picture. But just to say the full picture is clean, to me, is the beginning of naivety and the beginning of weakness.
Thank you, Didier. Greg, you live now in London. The UK is a very strong partner of NATO. Do you anticipate any situations like this until the July 4th election?
It doesn't. Rishi Sunak didn't give the Russians much time, did he? No, I think what Didier is saying would apply almost anywhere. I think that it's constant and in all directions. I think for a stretch of time in the early stages of the war in Ukraine, I think that many security officials thought that the Russian bandwidth was largely being consumed with the war itself. But over the past 6 to 9 months, I think we've seen more and more cases and evidence that Russia has reinvigorated these entities that carry out these attacks in other locations, including the UK.
Thank you very much. Adila, would you like to a final comment?
I was trying to think what's the clear danger that is approaching us in the near future, and I don't know. I really don't know, because some steps have been made by the big platforms. For example, Facebook, of course, we know them. They have this army of debunkers and so on, and we see that even to build a new bot on X, for example, today, it costs a lot of money. Just to get the API, you need to pay $100 per month to have a bot, like an official, a legal bot, right? You have to buy it. So big players can influence, have influence, because they have the big money, and you have to invest a lot of money. The question is whether we are prepared to pay the money to counterattack or to defend ourselves from these operations. And I agree here about what has been said before. To think that the sphere is clean, the political sphere is clean of influence and of influence operations, that's really naive, because we don't know when it starts, and we don't know exactly what are the main goals of these influence operations. Let's take Moldova, for example. Is Ilan Shor, the oligarch that everybody is talking about, a Russian whatever? We don't know, right? But we see in Moldova there are elections coming up, and we see, and we know exactly that the Russians are going to play a game there, right? They're going to be part of the game, the political game in Moldova. They have interests, they have the capabilities, they have the money. So can we say that they're influencing, not influencing? We don't know that. The problem with influence operations is that we try to figure out too late what has happened. Because it's still, in spite of the fact that we have good technology now all over the world, that we are developing technologies. By the way, 4 years ago, you had nothing.
Absolutely.
We had like, you know, huge companies against cyber attacks, but you had nothing to counter attacks on the information level. Today, it's not the same situation. We have companies tackling these attacks, but still, it's not live. You don't know exactly at the moment when it's happening. You can know around it. So the influence it's very hard to counterattack. We have to be aware all the time that somebody is trying to influence us. We have to be aware that some bad guys out there are trying to destroy our democracies, and we have to be with this idea, to sleep with this idea, and to wake up with this idea, because they are out there and they have the capabilities, and they did it for so many years. The Russians, for example,
Yes.
from the 40s, right? This information is there. The KGB was expert in this. So they're not going to stop. They're not going to stop.
I'm afraid we have no time, but along these lines, and as an epilogue, I'm not an expert on the subject, but I was trying to learn a little more. I read something which allow me for 20 seconds to read it to you. It is a little generic, but I think it is important that Russia has undermined Western security to some extent, but it has certainly not stopped the Western powers from shaping policies, economy, and culture in a democratic way on the global level. Western states must recognize the danger and consider a thought-out plan to decisively respond to Russia's strategy in a unified way. Our strength lies in our ability to adapt, to unite in the face of threats, and to uphold the values that define us. European and American responses need to get ahead of these tactics. This requires robust cybersecurity measures, public awareness campaigns, and a resilient press, Didier. As we move forward to these two elections, let's be vigilant, let us be united, and let us be undeterred in our commitment to democracy. So with this, I thank you all for participating in this excellent discussion. Greg, thank you very much. Alina, Didier, Attila, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause to this excellent panel.